the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday Edition. We're very pleased today to have the Senator from the great state of Utah, Mitt Romney, joining us for the entire program. There are so many things that we want to talk about, and Senator Romney, what a pleasure to have you on Sunday Edition today.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's good to be back with you.
It wasn't all that long ago that you and I, as part of this program, we were sitting on the shore of the Great Salt Lake at the marina out there. And I thought, since that was the last conversation we had on this program, that we'd follow up on that. And, you know, I always kind of pride myself in kind of knowing what's going on in the state of Utah, but I was clueless as to how threatening the situation was with the level of the lake, the dust that could be there. And I know here in the state of Utah, there's been a strong conversation now at every level, business, legislature, everything. I know you and others back in Washington, D.C. are working on the situation with the Great Salt Lake, part of the drought, but there's more to it. Where do we stand right now on the level of the lake?
Well, it's a real concern, of course, and we don't know what the weather's going to do, what the climate's going to do, but if we have a continuation of the kind of weather pattern we've had over the last decade or so, we got some real problems because, as you point out, the lake bed has a lot of dust within it that would be poisonous, would make us sick on the Wasatch Front. We can't allow the Great Salt Lake to disappear on us. And so we're going to have to take some steps to make sure it doesn't disappear. The state legislature has funded about $40 million to do a study of how to make sure it stays full. We've authored legislation in Washington as well, bipartisan, to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers gets involved and takes responsibility for evaluating what the problem is, what the solutions may be. And frankly, Doug, in the infrastructure bill that we passed, we put about $40 billion aside nationwide for water projects. It may well be a very expensive fix. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I think we can't assume it's just going to be able to be solved by everybody taking a shorter shower. We got a bigger problem than that.
Many of us have always heard the term, you know, any ideas on the table. Don't be afraid to ask the stupid questions or offer even what you might think is a pretty harebrained idea. I've heard all kinds of eclectic things, including a pipeline coming from the Pacific Ocean to it. And a very dear friend of mine, quite notable in the state, actually called me and suggested that because he used to work on oil pipelines and so on. He goes, why don't we just run a pipeline from the Pacific Ocean? What are some of the ideas that you are hearing and experts that you consult are hearing that really might be the idea? You and I are familiar with Cottonwood Creek. And so, I mean, it doesn't even flow in the summer months.
Well, there's sort of a hierarchy for more difficult, for less difficult to the most difficult. Less difficult are the kinds of things where we reduce our usage of water. We're not watering lawns as much. We take out some lawns. We put in place artificial turf and so forth. So we conserve. That's the easiest thing to do. Hard for a lot of us, but economically pretty straightforward. But then it gets a little more difficult, which is, okay, let's see if we can't recycle some of the water that we're just putting back into the streams or into the earth. So let's take our secondary water, reprocess it, perhaps our sewer water as well, reprocess that, use it for sprinkling and so forth. So that's a secondary area. Then there are dams to, if you will, collect water that might come in a monsoon that might otherwise just flow into a river and go away, go into the ocean. Let's collect those. And then you get to the more very expensive, and who knows if they'd even work, ideas, which pipelines are one of them, which is there some kind of a pipeline that would make a difference? Other ideas that are sort of secondary in nature is looking at the other states that draw from the Colorado River, like California, and say, you know, maybe if California did more desalination of their water, they wouldn't have to draw as much from the Colorado. Or maybe if Denver was getting some water from, let's say, from the Missouri, they might not have to draw from the Colorado. And so we'd have more water in the Colorado. So there's some solutions that are going to be broader than just what we do here in Utah, but it's a hierarchy that we're going to have to evaluate. And that's why the study has to be done, and done quickly, because the consequence of not getting this right, it's pretty severe.
There's so many other things that I obviously want to talk about on the program today, and I'm sure you do too. But before we leave water, agriculture, you know, everybody in the state of Utah, we love our agriculture. Many of us have agriculture roots, at least maybe one generation, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations back. But boy, agriculture, I've heard some of the statistics on the Bear River and others, and huge amounts, sometimes anywhere 70, 80% of Utah's water goes to agriculture. Now that's raising food rather than raising a really nice Kentucky, a lawn in our front yards. But what about agriculture? Are there great opportunities there to save water and keep the flow of the Bear River and other rivers, the Sevier River and so on, higher?
Well, there may be. Of course, a lot of the agriculture water is used once and then reused, and some of the water seeps into the aquifer as well. So when you think about what agriculture is using, you've got to remember that that is also part of our aquifer system, that we can't afford to have that dry up either. So that's why the study has to be done to say, okay, what steps really make the most sense? I look at a place like California. They're raising a lot of alfalfa there. I think about 80% of their alfalfa ends up going overseas, is exported. Well, let's consider what they're doing with agriculture in California before we decide what kinds of changes we'll make here. Because look, agriculture is a key part of our state. And we have major communities in our state that rely on agriculture, as we do as a society. It's going to continue to thrive, but can we save water in the way we grow crops? Are there different crops to grow? Can we use some of our secondary water sources? There's a lot of evaluation that's going to go on to find these answers. And frankly, some of us wonder, why did it take us so long to get to this? Why didn't we start doing this 5, 10 years ago? And I think a lot of folks thought, oh, this global warming thing is just a hoax, it'll go away. I hope so, hope it goes away. But I'm afraid if we see more of what we've been seeing, we better be planning.
You're one of the first notable Republicans who really did say, and I remember, and I won't quote it exactly, but it was, I'm one that actually does believe in climate change and global warming, and I do believe that mankind has a role in it. That was revolutionary at the time, and it wasn't all that long ago. We're not talking 20, 30 years ago. Have Republicans been particularly slow to this game?
I think so. I think by and large, we're somewhat skeptical about the liberals that are crying on various issues. And there was some sense that, oh, these scientists are not giving us a straight story. This is going to go away. It's just a cycle. And by the way, that's possible. I hope that's the case. But I think at this stage, we'd be wise to listen to the pros as opposed to see what someone on the internet is saying. And take action, which just in case may absolutely be needed. Because if we dry up here, I was with a water director for one part of our state, I won't mention which one, but he went to the cities and towns in his region and said, I got news for you. We will have no water in 2 years if we continue using water as we are. No water in 2 years. And that led the mayors and city councils of the respective communities to get together and put in place new restrictions which will solve that problem. But we've got to take those actions, and it's a lot easier to take them now than when you're on the cusp of running out of water.
There's so much to talk about. We will take a brief break, and we'll be right back on Sunday Edition with Senator Mitt Romney. Sunday Edition today with Senator Mitt Romney, and it's a great opportunity to have you on the program, Senator, and you and I have had many discussions over the years, and I think it's some of the great conversations that we have had. And this is something that I think there's an elephant, whether you want to see it as a Republican elephant or not, or the proverbial elephant. There's an elephant in the room right now, and I've always seen politics as contentious. I've seen it's even been called a blood sport. But at the end of the day, I've seen people come together, even people that had been labeled as political foes. And, there's some of the legendary examples, including our own Senator Hatch and Ted Kennedy. But at the end of the day, even after tweaking each other, they'd go, we'll work this out. Is that happening in Washington today?
The good news is it is happening. It doesn't happen on some of the most contentious issues. Immigration, for instance. People just can't seem to work together on that. I'm going to try in the time that I have to see if we can't make progress on that front. But some issues we are able to work together on. So a group of us, about 8 of us, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, did a bill together on COVID relief. This is back a couple of years ago. Then we did a bill together on infrastructure, negotiated it, put it together, got it passed in both houses, signed by the president. Then we did some work with regards to registration and background checks for firearms. We did that together. We've now finished a bill that we've done, actually 2 bills, to reform of the Electoral Count Act, to do our very best to make sure that there can't be a corruption of the process by which we select our president. So These are things that are able to be done on a bipartisan basis because there are some folks that want to get the job done, not just talk about fighting, but talk about fighting and winning. Winning is a part of the equation. Right. We want to get stuff done, get laws actually passed.
As far as the state of Washington today, we have such an amazing form of government, the checks and balances. Hopefully, we were all taught that in school. But it seems that there are those that almost abdicate their responsibility. So the responsibility goes elsewhere, either in executive orders or it goes to the Supreme Court. And you look at honestly, the polls that show the faith in and the trust in our various American institutions that go all the way from Congress all the way to our religious organizations and so on. Those polls have been abysmal. I remember on the old radio program, I'd just sit back and go, can you believe the approval rating of Congress is only 17%? Well, that was wonderful compared to what we saw recently in 7%. And it's not just Congress, it's other major institutions as well. When I was a kid, boy, I just saw the United States as something that could not, would not, absolutely it was the best. We would not and could not fail. I'm not sensing that kind of confidence, and the polls seem to bear that out. How serious is that for our country?
Well, democracy requires strong institutions of the type you're describing, whether it's law enforcement, military, the congressional entity, the executive branch, the judicial branch, families, churches, unions. All these things are required for a democracy to work. We've seen countries have votes where we're very excited, oh, they have democracy because they had a vote. But because they didn't have trust in their institutions, they ceased becoming a democracy after a short period of time. And I'm concerned about what you're seeing here. What's happened is that a lot of politicians on both sides of the aisle have found you can get a lot of support and a lot of eyeballs and a lot of contributions by attacking fundamental institutions in America and being cynical about every one of our institutions. And as they do that, they rise up in the polls. But they're killing the institutions that make America the entity that has been the hope of the earth. So, you know, when you attack our institutions one by one, it may help you a little bit, but the cost for our country is enormous.
When I think of some of the things that unfolded recently with John Adams, you know, facts are stubborn things. Right. And there's so many great quotes. Winston Churchill has a wonderful one, and I wish I had a better memory, but it's wonderful. Trust me, it's really good, and I wish I had it at my fingertips.
Is it this one? One of my favorites, which is he said, you can trust the Americans to get things right after they've exhausted all the alternatives.
That's right. That's not the one I was thinking of, but that's a favorite too. Yeah. And, you know, and after all, he was American and British at the same time. But when you look at these things, that facts are true, it seems like, and I've seen this with some very dear friends, people that I love, people that I know would go to the wall for me, would make the best neighbors in the world, and they are believing the craziest stuff right now, Senator. And you try to have a rational conversation, and when you hear from the White House itself that there are alternative facts, and there's this and that, and you know, don't watch what this hand is doing, pay attention to this one, because I feel like I'm in a carnival sometimes. I go, are we really that gullible? And do our leaders at the highest levels believe that we are, is it the P.T. Barnum, there's a sucker born every minute? Well,
you know, when you use the phrase alternative facts, what that means is there are facts and there are lies.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And to call a lie an alternative fact is dangerous, misleading, and causes people to make wrong decisions. And a democracy requires us to have a common base of facts. And the new media today, social media that we go to, internet and so forth, there are no fact checkers, there are no editors. We don't even know who it is that's posting these, quote, facts. It may be Russian bots of some kind or Chinese bots. We just don't know. And yet people grab these things, pass them along, and we end up becoming highly divided, in part because we don't have that same fact base. So, yeah, when people start talking about alternative facts, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah. That means a lie. Let's evaluate whether something is true or false and make an assessment on what is the truth and what is fact.
You've been somewhat of at least a Republican lone wolf back in Washington, D.C., and right now we are in a season where it seems to be open season, and people like yourself and others seem to be fair game even within their own party. When we come back, can we talk about the state of what's going on in Washington today, especially in light of the midterm elections that are coming up? And this will be the first question I'll ask you, and I'll give you lots of time to think about it, which I'm sure you'll need. Are you glad you're not running in this midterm election? We'll find the answer to that when we come back on Sunday Edition. We're back with Senator Mitt Romney on this special edition of Sunday Edition. It's there's so many things that I've wanted to chat with you about. And I asked you the question a moment ago and gave you a whole break to think about it. You think of how many people are running. I think of like Liz Cheney and others who are, I mean, both political stripes or all political stripes who seem to be struggling this year. Are you glad you're not running for, assuming, of course, that you want to rerun and will, or not rerun, run again. We'll ask that coming up in a moment as well. But are you glad you're not doing it now?
I think anybody is happy they're not running at a particular time because running a race is a challenge. And I think this will be a difficult time. I think it's a particularly difficult time for Democrats. You know, I love my Democrat friends. I don't cast aspersions on them that aren't merited, but they've created inflation, and that's really hurting the American people, and that is the issue people care about. Go across the state, that's what people are talking about. They're having a hard time putting food on the table, buying medicines, getting their kids dressed with clothes they can afford. This is a really tough time for the American people. And the president's in the White House. I know he's going to say, well, it's the Russians invading Ukraine that caused it, or it's this or that. But you know what? The buck stops at his desk. And he made some decisions early on that have cost us very, very dearly. And he doesn't have a plan for getting us out of inflation. The most recent so-called Inflation Reduction Act is not at all designed to do that. So it's going to be tough as a Democrat. I think Republicans will do well in this midterm cycle. So probably not bad to run as a Republican during this cycle. We'll probably pick up the House. The Senate is going to be a closer call. You know, time will tell.
Does it depend on what stripe of Republican you are in order to be successful? Because the Trump factor is really out there. You see it, you feel it, and it seems to really have taken effect, including in our neighboring state just over the last few days in Wyoming.
No question, but President Trump has by far the most influence over the Republican Party and over people who are running for office in the Republican Party. And his effect really plays out during the primary season, where people he supports are more likely to be successful in primaries. Not all of them, but if you had to have, you know, the endorsement of one Republican, why his would be probably the most powerful endorsement that you'd be seeking. And so he's had that influence. Now we'll see how his candidates do in the general. But overall, Republicans will probably be on track to do pretty well.
We're still in the throes of all of this, the aftermath of January 6th. And I've told our viewers, I've told our listeners on KSL Radio that I've been around a long time now, and I've seen a lot of really tough things in our country. I'm old enough I can remember the assassination of President Kennedy. I can remember the civil rights assassinations, the Vietnam War, Watergate, the resignation of both the vice president and the president in the 1970s, the attack on America. I think of some of our natural disasters. I have never been so distressed and brokenhearted for my country and for the American people than I was on January 6th. I was watching the TV in utter disbelief. And the aftermath of that too, which again kind of gets back to alternative facts and big lies. I mean, we've had so many I honestly can't believe it's happening in this great country that I love so much.
Well, we look to leaders. We look to people to tell us the truth. We look to people of character. It's interesting, and the people we choose to be leaders, we want them to make good decisions, to be visionary and smart and capable and guide us in the right way. But we also want people of character who believe in the kinds of values that have been so critical to Americans' history. What America is flows from the character of people like Washington and Adams and Hamilton and Madison and Jefferson and Lincoln and frankly, Reagan and others. I mean, this has built the character of our country, and what's happened more recently is that there have been people who have put their personal ego and their personal interests ahead of the interest of the country and have jeopardized the commitment we have to our basic democracy. and it's a frightful thing. I think we'll swing back, but it's been a very difficult time, I think, for the country. And I share with you your perspective, which is the attack on the temple of democracy, if you will, the symbol in the world of freedom and democracy, is something which shook us to the bone.
You think of other presidents or candidates that have found themselves kind of up against the wall, you know, whether it was the closest election at that time in American history in 1960. Richard Nixon was encouraged to go in and challenge it, and he said, no, it would do damage to the country. Al Gore and everything going to the Supreme Court in the 2000 election. And finally, you know, Al Gore said, no, it went to the Supreme Court. I don't want to damage the country. Are we now to the point where, in order to attain or retain high office, we're willing to do damage to the country?
I think that's the case for some people, but not for all. I think there are a number of people, many of whom are thinking of running for president in 2024, who really do put the country ahead of their own personal interest and will do what they think is right for the country. Preserving democracy is essential for us and our freedom and for people around the world. And that comes first. And I've been disappointed in some cases to watch politicians who take action which they know is not true, which is designed to foster their higher approval numbers and their donations, but which puts in jeopardy the very foundation upon which they and all of us rely.
There's so many other issues that I hope we have the opportunity. I've kind of gone with what I would like to talk with you about today, and I so appreciate you being with us and being so candid. I look forward to an opportunity to talk about some of the various acts and various things that you're working on. But I would be remiss, and I'm sure everybody wants to know, are you going to run for re-election in 2 years?
Well, I was thinking about making an announcement right here.
Right here.
Right here,
this
right now.
This is the place.
Right here. But I'll probably wait. I'll probably wait a little bit before I make that announcement. But you're kind to offer it. I'm optimistic about our future. One thing you can't forget is that freedom is a very powerful elixir. And we in this country have freedom. It allows us to be entrepreneurial, to be innovative. We lead the world. We love this country. We're fundamentally a patriotic, freedom-loving people. That will hold us in good stead.
Senator, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Edition.
Thanks, Doug.
And we'll be back next week with Sunday Edition. Music and the spoken word is coming up next.